Our loving God in heaven, we thank you for this Sabbath day. We thank you that we can join together, for the information that makes some sense of the confusion and tumult that is in the world at the moment. We don't want to add to that confusion, Lord, so we ask that you would guide our discussion and our thoughts and our studies, and we pray for your presence. We think of all the members right across Oceania today and ask for a blessing for them as well. And so do not leave us this morning, Lord, until you bless us, is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. So good morning. I've noticed a few more people come on, so I'll just repeat what I've said earlier, is that I just want to do a small review of what I shared in Fiji, March, April, that was recorded a couple of weeks ago and has been on our YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel, you need to be. In fact, maybe after this, we could talk about all the ministry channels that you should be subscribed to and press the notification button. So if you haven't heard those first two studies, then I'm asking you to remain silent for this particular study because it might not make sense, and I can explain things afterwards, or you can go ahead and watch the studies, hopefully. So beware the person that preempts their study by saying this will be a short one, because they never are, but I think this will be a short one. At least that was the plan. So the discussion is on Sunday law, and the study began with a review of Acts 27 and the two ships, the parables of the two ships that give us the two lines, one starting in 1798 and the other in 1989, our two times of the end, our things old and things new from Matthew chapter 13, that all good scribes that are diligent in the things of the kingdom of heaven must know. So we reviewed those lines, and in particular we were looking at Sunday law. So we came down to the end of our lines, and we want to note that the time period between the midnight cry and Sunday law, which is shipwreck. And we know that that is the overturning of the United States, the institutions of the United States. And I've just brought this portion of the second line, made it larger. We note that the Battle of Beneventum occurred in 275 BC. So back up. So in Acts 27, Acts 27:27 gives us the midnight cry. It's the doubling. It's when they can see shipwreck ahead. Acts 27:37, we're told that there are 276 people on board that boat. When we take away Aristarchus, Luke, and Paul, we're left with 273, and that gives us the two groups. One group being the Levite, the other group, the three, being the priests. So 273 BC. So we use that number 273 as a symbol of the Levites, but we also went back in history and looked at 273 BC and saw that there was a very important event that happened in that year. So let's enlarge it here. 273 BC is when Egypt sent its delegation or ambassadors to Rome. And why did they do that? Because Rome had defeated Pyrrhus in 275 BC. Rome had arrived on the world stage, the world was taking notice, and Egypt sent ambassadors to Rome to forge alliances and friendships with the rising power. So we mark 275 minus 275 as 2021, the Battle of Beneventum, minus 273 as June 24, 2022, which is the Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health Organization, the Supreme Court case that overturned Roe versus Wade. In my first study, I had July written. That was a boo-boo. So it's June, and thank you for all the people that told me that. So it's June 24, not July 24. And so the study went on to show that 272 BC, where Rome sent a delegation to Egypt, where we also note that the Battle of Tarentum, Tarentum falls, and we have the Battle of Argos and Pyrrhus dies. But it's also when Rome sends ambassadors back to Egypt, and it's headed by Quintus Fabius Maximus Gurges. And spoiler alert for those that haven't watched the first two presentations, we're marking that as 2024, this year, shipwreck Sunday law. The reason we did that is we went back to the name of Quintus Fabius Maximus Gurges. And we noted in Roman nomenclature, so this is how they build their names, that Quintus is his prenomen. So with Roman names, you had a prenomen, which is your personal name, your given name. And his name was Quintus, and you were called Quintus if you were the fifth son or you were born in the fifth month. Two reasons to being called Quintus. Fabius is his nomen, which to the Romans was your most important name. It's the name that identified which gens or tribe you belong to. It's what gave you your authority in society. If you had belonged to a strong and important, powerful gens or tribe, then it could take you a long way. Like Julius Caesar, he was born poor, but it didn't matter because he's from the Julii tribe, so he could climb that ladder. And we noticed that Fabius means faba beans. They were bean farmers. And we showed that faba beans were used for elections or voting. We call them broad beans or fava beans. They're known as a couple of names. If you've heard the expression, spill the beans. So today, if we say spill the beans, we're asking somebody to divulge secret information. That's how we use it today. It's like somebody knows something you don't. So spill the beans. Come on, tell us what you know. But its origins, it's got Greek origins, and it meant that you were carrying the urn that contained all the beans, the light-coloured beans that were yes votes and the black-coloured beans that were no votes. And if you spilt the beans, if you dropped the urn, then the information was disclosed too early. So you were getting the information before you were meant to. So it's actually an election result. So spilling the beans is getting the election result. And then Maximus Gurges is this man's cognomen, which is like a nickname. It's a descriptive name. And you can get a cognomen from just as a nickname, or it can show which family you're from in that particular tribe. So it can be given for a couple of reasons. So he was called Maximus Gurges because in his youth, he was quite excessive. Not exactly sure what that meant, but I don't know, drinking, partying, carrying on. He was called Maximus Gurges. So that's how his name went. So we identified that Sunday law is connected with elections and voting. And so we went through the history of voting rights, particularly in the United States, because we want to know the truth of the fourth beast, which is Rome, which identifies the United States at the end of the world. It is the glorious land. There are half the world is voting this year, but the glorious land is the one country that everybody is focused on. So, but first of all, just a couple of things on Maximus Flood. I came across an article from the Royal Society of Victoria. And I'll just share this. So the Royal Society of Victoria is, it convenes the Victoria's science community. Membership is open to anyone interested in science and its history. And this is its April 2024 edition. And I will just read the first two paragraphs. It's on the rise of misinformation and disinformation. In this edition, we're looking at 4 crises currently faced by our planet. For 3 of these, it's relatively easy to see the threat. Declining biodiversity is threatening the existence of species. Air, water, and soil pollution are impacting the health of every living thing. And climate change is increasingly throwing the Earth's systems into chaos. They really feel like the horsemen of an apocalypse. So he's noted the 3 things there: declining biodiversity, pollution, and climate change. The 4th of these crises, the rise of misinformation, might sound less catastrophic than its counterparts, but it is arguably the horseman who preceded the others. Understanding, curbing, and countering misinformation is vital if we stand any hope of meaningfully addressing these planetary crises. What is misinformation? What problems does it cause? And most importantly, what can we do about it? I liked their explanation here, their definition. Information informs an audience about something. It is data that has been processed and given context so that it conveys meaning. The numbers 12, 18, and 90 are seemingly random data, but with the context of 12 goals, 18 behinds, 90 points, those numbers inform the audience of Collingwood's winning score in the 2023 AFL Grand Final. Obviously, know who this person follows. The difference between misinformation and disinformation is intent. Both refer to false, inaccurate, or misleading information. Misinformation is shared without the intent to deceive, while disinformation is created and shared with the intention of deliberately deceiving or misleading others. If misinformation is like manslaughter, then disinformation is like murder. Either way, the information is dead. Then they'll go on to give a bit of a history of misinformation and disinformation, and give an example of the sugar industry, which is kind of very interesting. But down here, they explain the reasons why we've seen a rise in it now. With a long history of misinformation and disinformation, why has it now increased to the level of a planetary crisis? The University of Melbourne's Professor Andrew Pefors puts it down to 2 fundamental reasons: the advent of the internet and our difficulties in determining which information we should believe. Put simply, it comes down to technology and psychology. The internet and social media have rapidly accelerated the spread and escalated the risks posed by misinformation. Once restricted to legacy media formats, incorrect information is now able to quickly and repeatedly reach its audience and disrupt societies, as we witnessed during the COVID-19 pandemic. Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, Google Search and Google News, Snapchat and Apple News are key digital platforms for news and information for many Australians, as detailed by the Australian Communications and Media Authority in their 2020 position paper on addressing misinformation. As unregulated as they can seem, these platforms have at least some ability to flag inaccurate, misleading, or inappropriate content. In contrast, content shared on encrypted message platforms like WhatsApp and Telegram is significantly harder to address. So it'll then go on and talk some more about that. But what I wanted to point out there that I've got from this article, but I'm seeing it elsewhere as well, is the problem of WhatsApp. And we know that it's a blessing, but it can also be a curse. And if I talk to you about the, is it the Wakely riots? Am I pronouncing that right? Yes, the Wakely riots in Sydney earlier this year. in April. If you remember the Wakely riots, there was a young extremist who entered a church while they were live streaming and stabbed the priest on live stream. So that within half an hour, there were 2,000 people that descended on that church. And the information got around quicker than it did any of the news sources through these WhatsApp groups. Some of the WhatsApp groups were 800 people plus, but there were a number of them. And some people on these groups were calling for calm, but there was enough people sharing misinformation and disinformation on that group that created a riot. And so WhatsApp has come to the attention of a lot of people across the world as one of the worst sorts of distributors of misinformation. So I think that's something that we need to be aware of as a movement, because we rely on it so much. It does have its pitfalls. So I just wanted to say that on the on Maximus Gurgis. Yeah, if you Google that, there's a really good Guardian article, and it talks about how the information spread on WhatsApp, and they interviewed people, and they said they were getting the same videos, the same photos, but with different commentary and different explanations. So you really didn't know what to believe. But it was really a problem there. Okay, so that's Maximus Gurgis. So the fava beans. Actually, we might just, before we go to voting, just want to touch again on Quintus. So we noted that Quintus, you were called Quintus if you were the 5th son or born on the 5th month. So we looked at, whoops. The Roman calendar and the Julian calendar. And noted in the Roman calendar, there were only 10 months. It was a lunar calendar, and they had no accounting for the winter time. So it started in spring, and the months were Martius, Aprilis, Maius, Juno, Quintilis, Sextilis, September, October, November, December, which makes perfect sense because September is 7, 8, 9, 10 months. There were a lot of changes actually to the calendar between Romulus and the Roman calendar, beginning of the Roman calendar, and Julius Caesar and the Julian calendar. There was an emperor that introduced Januarius and Februarius, but it was Julius Caesar in about 45 BC that made the major changes. And he turned it from a lunar calendar into a solar calendar and began it with January, Januarius, or we say January. And so we see the addition of 2 months, changes to the days of the month, quite a lot of changes, important changes. And it didn't end there because Augustus tweaked it as well, but we still know it as the Julian calendar. And so beginning in January, we note that Quintilis, from the Roman calendar, the name changed to July, because Julius Caesar would name it after himself. And then Augustus would go on to name Sextilis after himself. So Quintilis became July because it was Julius Caesar's birthday, I think 11th or 12th or 13th, 12th or 13th, I think. Not sure, around that time. August, it wasn't his birthday. I think September is actually Augustus's birthday, but it was an important month for Augustus. So we mark July as the 5th month. And we also, when it comes to Donald Trump, we mark him as the 5th president since the time of the end. So since Ronald Reagan, we've had Bush Sr., Clinton, Bush Jr., Obama, and the 5th is Donald Trump. But then he is also, because we've got Biden, he's also the 7th. And prophetically, we understand that the 5th and the 7th are the same. Think of Sardis and Laodicea. So he is the 5th, he is the 7th, which is essentially the same. He will be the 7th. Anyway, so that's Quintilis. And that was a piece of information that I left off explaining in the first study. And we mark Julius Caesar as significant because in July, actually, I might just take that back. That there's quite a bit of controversy among historians about who was the first dictator of the Roman Republic. So Julius Caesar stands on the cusp from the old Republican empire and the new imperialism. So some people say, oh, Augustus is the first dictator, but he's really yeah, Julius Caesar is on the cusp of that. And he did declare himself a dictator and a dictator for life. So we mark Julius Caesar here. When we looked at his name, we noted that his name is Gaius Julius Caesar, Gaius being his praenomen, his given name. Julius, because he belonged to the Julii tribe, it's his nomen, but Caesar was his cognomen. And he was called that because it showed which tribe he belonged to. And he belonged to the tribe, sorry, not the tribe, the family, which particular family of the Julii tribe he belonged to. And he belonged to the family whose ancestor had killed an elephant in the Punic Wars. And so Caesar actually is, I think it's Phoenician, whatever the language is for Punic, but I think it's Phoenician for elephant. So we can mark elephants there. And when he minted his first coin, he had a picture of an elephant above his name. So we note that in July this year will be the Republican National Convention, and there will be 2,272 pledged delegates that will go to that conference to vote for Donald Trump because he has won the primary. There'll be more that vote for him. They will all vote for him, but they are the ones that are so far pledged. So the history of Caesar and the transition from the old republic to the new dictatorship, imperial dictatorship, is marked with Julius Caesar. From the old republican system to the new autocracy. Many Romans treated him as the first emperor, the founder of the system of one-man rule. Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to review is our stories of Daniel. So if you remember, we looked at the first 3 chapters of Daniel and saw that they illustrated how the everlasting gospel works. So we'll do that here. Daniel 1 illustrated the first angel's message because Daniel had to fear God and give more than he feared Nebuchadnezzar. He had to give God glory, which he did. He glorified God in his body by not eating of the king's table. And because judgment was coming in 3 days, 10 days, and in 3 years. 2 lots of judgments for Daniel. Daniel 2, second angel's message, when we see the image and it's 4, as it was, as Nebuchadnezzar had dreamed it. He saw the fall of Babylon, from literal Babylon to spiritual Babylon in the toes. The image fell. And then Daniel 3, which is Sunday law. Unrighteous decree and a time of trouble such as never was in the fiery furnace being heated 10 times as it was wont to be heated. So these 3 chapters illustrated the first, the work of the everlasting gospel, which is kind of interesting, but it can mean nothing unless you see a second witness. And we see a second witness in the next 3 chapters. So Daniel 4, Daniel tells the king, you better fear God, stop giving glory to yourself, you're going to get judged. Daniel 5, that's the first angel's message. Daniel 5, literal fall of Babylon. Daniel 6, Sunday law, third angel's message. So we see, when we see similarities and we see differences. So the differences that we noted from the two lots of 3 chapters is that, I might just shift that. We see this, the first 3 chapters as an illustration of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We see the next 3 chapters as an illustration of the United States of America. So similar to the parable that we see in Acts 27, 2 institutions, we can see that in the stories of Daniel. So we want to compare. If you notice, like in the story of Daniel chapter 4, the king is gone for 7 years, but the kingdom doesn't fall apart. Why? Because the institutions are in place. There's Daniel. It can run without Nebuchadnezzar. In Daniel 5, there is no Daniel, and the kingdom falls. Belshazzar's mum's got to say, hang on, I think we better go and get that old fella out there that used to work for us. He'll tell you what's going on. So kingdom falls, no Daniel. But what we want to do is compare Daniel 6 and Daniel 3, because we're interested in Sunday law and the unrighteous decree. And what we noticed when we went through the elections history, the history of voting rights of the United States, is the use of the word suffrage. And suffrage means prayers. Because what are you doing when you are praying? You are asking for somebody to intercede for you, to represent somebody who you're talking to, somebody who represents you and wants to intercede for you. So it's the same as when we vote. Voting is called suffrage, where we're engaging with the government to work on our behalf. So we see suffrage here in Daniel chapter 6. It's similar but different story in Daniel chapter 3. There's similarities and differences. So what is Daniel praying for here? He's praying the prayer of Daniel chapter 9. He's praying for restoration. And we're praying for restoration. The restoration that Daniel was after, the rebuilding of a city and the restoration of a king, is different to the restoration we're praying for. We're praying for the restoration of Eden, but it's restoration nonetheless. We don't want any earthly king. We see that as a problem. But anyway, Daniel chapter 6 is the prayers. So with Daniel chapter 6, with Daniel's predicament, there are a number of options. So the unrighteous decree is that you had to pray to the king, Darius, or you could petition the king, or you could petition your God. But if you petitioned your God, you'd get thrown in the lion's den. So was there any other option? And yes, there is. You could not petition at all. Just don't ask the king for anything and don't ask your God for anything. Just stay home, close your curtains. And why that is significant is because when we look at the election this year, is that kind of attitude, it's what is called disengaged voters, are going to have a huge effect on the election results. So there are some really interesting studies that have been happening since 2022, probably earlier, but they've been looking at the role of disengaged voters. So I want to share a little bit of information about that. First of all, I'll just take you to a page that explains, gives some reasons why people in the US don't vote. So here's an interesting article, 5 reasons people in the US don't vote. A list of the known causes. So there are many Americans that want to vote but can't. So why can't they? Because in some states, if you've had a conviction, if you've been a convicted felon, you are taken off the voter rolls. Sometimes it's very hard for people to get voter IDs because you've got to have a government issued photo ID. So that limits you. And there are countries, so not countries, sorry, there are US territories, Guam, the Virgin Islands, the North Mariana Islands, American Samoa, Puerto Rico. They aren't allowed to vote in general elections, even though the results of that election influence their lives. So there are hundreds of thousands of non-voters that would vote if they could, but they can't. Then it explains why age, gender, education, socio-economic status, and race impact whether you vote or not. Poverty is a major factor there, as why people tend not to vote. Election day held on a Tuesday, which is the most ridiculous thing. The reason it's on a Tuesday is because way back in the day, that's when the farmers would take their produce into town. It was market day. So it's always been held on a Tuesday. And of course, if you're working, you don't get paid to take time off to go to the election. So it makes it hard on people. So people don't vote because they can't afford to lose their pay. People don't vote because there's only 2 parties and they don't feel that any of them represent them. But it's this one here that I'd like us to really have a think about. Citizens are less likely to vote if they don't think their ballot matters. As many as 15% of registered voters reported that they didn't vote in the 2016 presidential election because they didn't believe their vote would make a difference, according to Census Bureau data. A different Pew Research Center survey found that half of the participants didn't bother to research the election because they didn't think their vote impacted the government, even though voting is one of the few ways for citizens to push forward policies they support. So I think that's an important thing to take into account, because if we look at the external, it can also mirror what's happening internally. So people don't vote because they don't feel that it really matters that they participate. And that same thing can happen internally, is your ballot, your vote, your voice actually does matter. So everybody's participation actually matters. And so as in the external, so in the internal. I think that's a takeaway point that we can make from that. But it's these non-voters, and there are also disengaged voters. So we marked 1989 as the introduction of the World Wide Web. And information is going to boom. There's never, that the world has never had access to before. Now, back in the day, when I was growing up, I had the choice of 2 television channels. If we had money to buy an aerial, and my parents thought that aerials could make your home look better because they actually thought aerials were ugly, so we weren't allowed to have an aerial on our house. I don't think they could afford one anyway, but that was their excuse. We could have had 3 channels, but we only had 2. One was the ABC, which is our national broadcaster, and the other one was Channel 7. And so when you came home, there was children programming. You got to watch that. And if you were eating tea, you sat through the news while you ate tea or ate your dinner. Then after dinner, there would be a current affairs. And then you got to the show you wanted to watch. You got to your sitcom or whatever the main feature of the night was. But most people had to sit through the news. If you received a newspaper and you were only interested in the sports section, you would at least see the front page of a newspaper before you got to even if you didn't read it, you saw it before you got to the back page. Information has grown phenomenally since then. And now people have so much choice of television, cable, internet, that you can be totally disengaged from politics. And so I find relatives of mine today can put the television on tonight and at night and totally avoid the news. Can just switch or just go to a channel that is on, you know, just on anything that they particularly like. So people can just engage in sports news or reality television, anything that they prefer, and totally disengage from politics. But what these studies are finding is that when you do that, you are more likely to find yourself on the wrong side and not on the right side of the politics. So I mean wrong as opposed to right, not right and left. So what happens is that even, for example, if you're just watching reality television, you're living in a fantasy world. So it might be home improvements, and you're watching homes getting built and getting landscaped, or any home improvement, and it will be something that is not attainable for you. So when it comes to elections, what is going to be the main driver of your thoughts for those elections? It's going to be affordability, inflation, those issues. It's not going to be the threat of democracy. So what they're finding is when we think of polarization within politics, we've been inclined to think of left and right, which is true. But within the left and within the right, they have their own disengaged voters, people that are not political junkies. So this movement as a whole is a political junkie. We live for current events and historical events and what's going to happen tomorrow. But we are a minority. And political junkies across the world are a minority, people that really follow politics intently. The majority of people are those that don't engage. But when you don't engage, you actually get funneled down the wrong way. You might just want to watch sports, listen to sports channels, watch, listen. It walks you down. So if you're in the United States and you're just watching sports channels, there's like an ambient atmosphere that is anti-Biden. It's just there. It's not in your face, but it's there, and it leads, because what they're finding is non-engaged voters do vote. So you've got a lot of people that don't vote, and then you've got a mass of people that are disengaged but still vote. We have that in Australia, in that we have compulsory voting. And the majority of Australians are disengaged. And so when it comes to our elections, our politicians have to spend that time just not upsetting anybody. Whereas American politics tends to be more toxic because they've got to get people to the polls. And so it's very, their campaigning is more divisive than ours because of the different situation. So being disengaged is a very dangerous position. So if we think of Daniel chapter 6, so you can pray to Darius. That's the wrong decision. You can pray to God, or you can not pray. That's also a wrong decision. So our engagement within the movement, if we mirror that as well, is also quite telling. The other thing to note there is the role of influencers, because the movement has said a fair bit on influencers before, and influencers also, even if they don't even talk about politics, they're walking you down a particular road. And this is just a quote from a Vox article in May 28, 2024. It is possible that the declining influence of mainstream news organisations is rendering the electorate increasingly distrustful. The past 4 years have witnessed a proliferation of podcasts and alternative media gurus who portray the government, medical authorities, and conventional journalistic outlets as hopelessly corrupt. As more voters get their information from such influencers, it's plausible that political distrust would rise. But among those who primarily get their news from social media, the president leads the third-party candidate by just 2 percentage points. So just let me share another article. So where people get their news consumption from. And this is an NBC. NBC, its polling is done by Project 538. I think that's what it's called. And it's a very good polling system. But this is presidential preference, how it varies by news consumption. So those that don't follow political news, 53%, are more likely to vote for Trump than Biden. Those that get their news from YouTube or Google, you can see the red, Trump over Biden. Cable news, red over Biden. Social media, red over the blue. Then as we come down, and we look at digital websites, national network news, like our ABC, newspapers, then it's the blue really outweighs the red there. Yeah, Trump fares best with those who don't follow political news. Is there anything else? So yeah, the way things are run at the moment, it's possible to be totally immersed in news and possible to be totally disengaged from news. But yes, being disengaged is a dangerous thing. And the other thing that they're finding is if you so within the Democrats, you've got people that are really engaged in politics, and I'm not saying far left. We're not talking far left or centrist. We're talking a whole different genre. So Democrats that are engaged in politics, those that are disengaged. The ones that are disengaged are more likely to think of inflation and affordability as things that they're worried about with the election. Those that are engaged are concerned about the threats to democracy. And the gap, what they're showing is the gap between engaged Democrats and disengaged Democrats is greater than the gap between disengaged Democrats and disengaged Republicans. They're much closer together. And they're the people that are going to determine the outcome of the election because they are in the majority. And so the political parties are really, well, at least the Democrats are really trying to engage the disengaged. The Republicans don't even have to worry about it because they're in their favour anyway. So the last thing I want to, or second last thing actually, that I want to touch on is May 30. So what happened on May 30? May 30, there was an earthquake that emanated from a lower Manhattan courtroom. Thursday evening, May 30, Donald Trump became the first former US president to be convicted of felony crimes. The former President Trump was convicted of 34 felony counts of falsifying business records to keep hush money payments out of the public eye before the 2016 election. The New York prosecution, brought by Alvin Bragg, was tried before a jury in Juan Merchan's court. Despite an aggressive defense strategy, multiple violations of a gag order, overt abuse leveled at witnesses, and the looming threat of a glowering Donald Trump staring you down, the jurors unanimously found Trump guilty on every count. So he's been found guilty on 34 counts of business fraud. Why is that important? Well, first of all, why is it a felony? So the words misdemeanor and felony, we don't use those terms here. So a misdemeanor is a less serious crime and a felony is a more serious crime. Here we call them indictable offences and summary offences. So a summary offence in Australia is the same as a misdemeanor. It's a less serious crime. And an indictable offence here is the same as a felony. So business fraud, falsifying business records. So falsifying business records would normally be seen as a misdemeanor. But why has he been convicted why has it been charged as a felony? Because that misdemeanor was used to cover up another crime. So if you falsify business records, which is a misdemeanor, to cover up another crime, then it becomes a felony. And what was that other crime? That other crime was election fraud. So this case, this whole hush money trial is essentially about election fraud. So what the jurors had to do, they had to say to themselves, did Donald Trump, beyond a reasonable doubt, cause business documents to be falsified and in order to conceal another crime, in order to conceal a New York election law, which is to use unlawful means to promote a candidate in an election. So there's a New York election law. You are not to use unlawful means to promote a candidate in an election. So that's why it became such a serious charge, a felony. Okay, and there were 3 ways that he falsified those documents. I won't, you can look them up for yourselves, but the jurors didn't have to be unanimous in their decision on how he did that. There were multiple ways that he falsified those documents. But so why is that important? was it such a bad thing that he slept with a porn star? Well, that's a moral issue. We wouldn't approve of it. That he hushed it up, that he paid the porn star money to keep it quiet. So, yeah, not a good thing to do. But what made it so impactful is that whether it was right or wrong, that was for the public to decide. If that information had have got out there, then the public would have used that information to make their decision at the election. And the public were never allowed to make that decision because it was kept from them. So Donald Trump had already got himself into trouble with the Hollywood tapes, where he said that he could just grab any woman by the genitals, which he had been doing. He was so well known amongst New York circles for his abuse of women. It's just prolific. So it was certainly no secret amongst the New Yorkers. That information had already been surfaced through the Hollywood access tapes. And if this information had have came out about the hush money to the porn star, that would have really affected not only the election results, but his standing within the Republican Party. He didn't have the backing back then that he has today. So covering up that information affected the 2016 election. So we can think there's major things that kept Hillary Clinton from office in 2016. We know the Russians are involved, disinformation, collusion is part of our midnight crime message. What has also surfaced lately is the work of WikiLeaks and how Julian Assange turned on Hillary Clinton and had a major effect. That's why a lot of the left stopped backing him as well, because his release of information that hurt Hillary Clinton. And now we also know that this hush money had we'll never know because the people never got to use that information to decide their vote. So May 30 was a huge event. He's not technically a convicted felon until he's sentenced, and he'll be sentenced on July 11. So Trump did what he always does. He used his money and influence, because he's rich and well connected, to hide the truth from the American people. Was it a big deal? That was for the voters to decide. And he took that choice away from them. So we have election interference as a, so some people, if you're not following that court case, it was hard to know what it was really all about. But it is at its essence about election interference, not about Donald Trump's morality, even though that wasn't what was on trial. Okay. So the last thing I'd like to share in closing, just to add on to the previous studies, is last year we were introduced to the book The Demon Lover by Robin Morgan on the sexuality or on the roots of terrorism, depending on what edition you had, the sexuality or the roots of terrorism. And here, Robin Morgan, I'll just read from the cover. She was establishing the connection between terrorism and sexuality. How can we understand the sexual charisma that violence exudes? She confronts and explores terrorism by the left and right, whether revolutionary or state-sanctioned, and links it all back to patriarchy. So I'm not going to take the time to review what we shared, but I just wanted to take you to the end of her book, where she gives a number of strategies to counterattack the patriarchal terrorism. The first strategy that she gives She says, talking about woman, she looks at the world, she thinks, I have no idea what to do to change all this. But those in power don't know what they're doing either. So she's very honest. I don't know how to change any of this, but does anybody? So she's going to suggest a couple of strategies. The first strategy, women, demand that all girls be taught self-defense in required courses at the primary school level. She knows this demand is consistent with genuine anti-violence, because if there are no prey, there can be no predator. And because such forms as judo and aikido wittily turn the attacker's own strength against himself. So strategy number one is self-defense. And not just any self-defense, but there are, she recommends those in particular. But what's the second strategy? She remembers that there are places in the world where women still cannot vote. So she uses her ballot as a potentially radical lever. So I'll leave it there. But the number one, so the two strategies that she lists are self-defense and voting. Voting matters. Every vote counts. Every person's individual participation matters. And it's easy to think that you can get lost in all that and that you don't matter and you can just drift along and follow the tide. But that never works. It's not healthy. It's not safe. So personal participation internally is required. So that is a review of the two presentations that were uploaded a couple of weeks ago, and with just adding the information that was left out. And so I'd also like to share a succinct, but I thought very good summary of that presentation that was shared with me by a member from Kenya. They wrote, when we mark 2014, 2019, and 2021 as shadow Sunday laws or developments for the Sunday law, and we have to thread events, as I demonstrated, the three-way marks are all about the Republican Party. 2014, the purging of Republican Party of moderates. 2019, the opportunity for Republicans to impeach Trump, but they failed. 2021, the second opportunity for Republicans to impeach Trump for January 6 insurrections, but they didn't. And then the Republican convention that will crown him they will crown him even though he's a convicted felon, and that will be July of 2024. So I thought the way that person just threaded from 2014, 2019, 2021 to 2024 was very nicely done. And so let's close with prayer. Dear God in heaven, there is so much happening around us at the moment, and it can be overwhelming, but we are not discouraged. We don't mind being counted amongst the minority that see truth in watching current events and understanding history. We just ask that you would continue to help us to sharpen our tools so that we may understand these events correctly and come away with the right conclusions. So, Lord, lead and guide us is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.